I'm Edie Lush, and the executive editor at Hub Culture. Really pleased now to be joined here during Transition Forum with Pierre Cannet. He's the director of Advocacy, WWF France. So Pierre, tell me, how do you see that we can build back better after COVID-19, despite about to be entering one of the largest recessions ever?
Yes, what we are seeing, it's a huge impact from the COVID crisis on our economy, on our society, on jobs. And the main issue is that to recover, many states will actually build up their recovery plans or sectorial recovery plans with strong announcements regarding the amount of finance being mobilized, but also the potential conditions to recover the companies sector by sector. So for instance, when you speak about the automobile industry that was very hit by the crisis, with sales of vehicles being impacted, the challenge for us is how you will mobilize hundreds and hundreds of millions, billions of euros to make sure that the industry can be recovered, but also in addition, making sure that these billions will help to drive the industry towards electric vehicles, clean vehicles, and making sure that these industries will also reinvent themselves by not just selling one by one vehicles, but services for mobility. How they can create jobs by not just creating a strong and single vehicle, but also making sure that services to mobility will enable the creation of new jobs. For instance, sharing cars or auto cars that are in cities being rented, and making sure the model that was based on every household needs to have one or two vehicles can change, and households will have actually services to mobility. And so with these billions, we are speaking, for instance, in Europe of 1,000 billion, 850 billion for the next 7 years. And so this huge amount of funds will need to be conditioned. And at this stage, the conditions are not strong enough to give the guarantees that the automobile industry, for instance, will engage and commit around strong reductions emissions, but also reinventing its own business. And so we need to see these announcements from the short term to the mid-longer term, where we have other challenges and crises to come to enable a more resilient industry, but driving the transition towards new products and new solutions with all these billions of euros mobilized.
You spoke about mobility there in terms of relaxing or reducing our dependence on petroleum-dependent cars. Can you point to a city or a region that you think is doing this really well, that we could use as a model for scaling up other regions?
Yes, so we are seeing, for instance, capital, Paris, with targets put by 2025 to see diesel vehicles out of the city and gasoline by 2030. And so it's very interesting to see that cities, step by step, within also the network of C40 cities around the world, taking actions to make sure that pollution is being reduced and making sure that the solutions that they welcome in the cities and incentives, like, for instance, giving more space for biking lanes, and this COVID crisis is providing also these kinds of new infrastructures. So what we're pushing also is a biking plan, recovery plan, where new lines are being opened all around the world in mega cities, because bike will help the physical distancing with the COVID crisis, and enabling that these fundings will help to build new bike lines, for instance, or provide security for bikers, or putting in place regulations like in France, you have the ability for companies to support their staff using the bike. So it's like a kind of subsidy that will help every month you as a staff member to buy a bike and use it and repair the bike. And so this allocation is something that companies need to take for their own staff, and it's a concrete measure that can be implemented from now. But from the automobile industry, we have also many other sectors. One key sector to us is also agriculture. we've seen how important it was to have autonomous and also resilient agriculture because of climate change, but today of COVID also, where the borders were closed, and understanding the relationship between agriculture and these pandemics, because we understand about agriculture, the risks to see a virus propagated within cattle. You understand also the deforestation impact on the zoonose and the connections between COVID pandemics and future risks of pandemics and the destruction of nature. And to us, to see a reform and transition of the agriculture in France and the EU is key. And we have the ability, for instance, to reduce our dependency on proteins, imported proteins, where you see soy and other being used to feed the cattle in France. And so our main ask is to see how you can both reinforce your autonomy and reduce your impact around the world because of deforestation and soy or other commodities, and making sure then that you provide responses to this crisis, but with support that will be mobilized in terms of recovery plans for the agriculture in the next months.
So we know that corporations are part of this transition to a cleaner economy. And I'd love to hear some examples of how you at WWF work with major companies to help them reduce their impact on nature.
So currently, our goal is to work with companies to change their business models. In the context of COVID, for instance, we are consulting companies to understand better how these recovery plans and supports can be driven and help them to drive the transition within their core business. Whether you speak of the automobile industry or the agriculture or distribution of goods, and all these sectors will need to be mobilized. In addition, we work, for instance, with AXA, so to make sure that we are integrating nature in the risks definition of disclosing, and how, for instance, we integrate climate and the risks related to climate in our core reporting and core business. But step by step, we really need to get it for nature as a whole. So as AXA, for instance, or other financial institutions, how can I reflect in my own reporting and measuring the fact that I'm using nature and the risks that it actually can provoke for the future and for the potential impacts it will generate. And so this work was launched at the G7 last year. And because we are moving towards a very important diplomatic sequence with the COP15, which is the Conference on Biodiversity by the CBD, UN CBD, but also the COP26 UNFCCC, so the Climate Change Conference next year, we need to understand how 2021 will be a major milestone for more ambition for nature, climate, and people, and making sure that countries will come kinds of armed or ready, I would say, to respond to the challenges because of the recovery plans that will mobilize many finance and fundings. And so 2021 is a milestone that we need to use to get more commitments from many stakeholders, including companies. And this is what we launched with AXA, for instance. Come to the table next year with these commitments. And from now, let's work on it.
Pierre, thank you so much for joining me here at Transition Forum. It's been a delight to hear about the work that you're doing. And I'm Edie Lush.